My full name is Clara and I am 30 years old. 6 days after giving birth, I came home to find my house sold and my locks changed. My husband had taken everything and run off with his mistress. I sold my wedding ring to buy tickets home. At the station, I used my last dollar to buy a stranded old man a ticket. 3 weeks later, a black limo pulled up outside my parents' house, and the driver said my name. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back when the people you trusted most tried to destroy your life. The freezing Chicago rain soaked through my thin hospital discharge sweater as I stood on my own front porch. I clutched my 6-day-old son Leo tightly against my chest. He was wrapped in 2 receiving blankets, but the November wind was brutal. I shivered uncontrollably. I had just spent nearly a week in a medically induced coma. Severe preeclampsia had nearly killed me on the delivery table. My blood pressure had skyrocketed. My organs had started shutting down, and the doctors had to put me under just to save our lives. I woke up yesterday groggy and terrified only to find an empty hospital room. The nurses told me my husband Nolan had taken the baby home 2 days prior, saying he needed to prepare the nursery for my arrival. They said he seemed like such a devoted father. I jammed my key into the brass deadbolt of our suburban home. It did not turn. I pushed harder, rattling the handle. The metal was freezing against my palm. I jiggled the key again, but it stuck halfway. The lock was entirely different. A sleek silver keypad had replaced the traditional deadbolt I had installed myself. Panic flared in my chest. I pounded my fist against the heavy oak door. "Open up! Nolan! Open the door! It is freezing out here." My voice cracked raw from the breathing tube they had just removed a day ago. Leo started to whimper against my collarbone. I shielded his tiny face from the wind. The door swung inward, but it was not my husband standing in the foyer. A woman in her late 40s wearing a sharp business suit and holding a clipboard looked at me with deep annoyance. She looked down at my wet clothes and the crying newborn in my arms. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "You are dripping all over the new hardwood floors." "Who are you?" I demanded, pushing my way inside the foyer. "Where is Nolan? What are you doing in my house?" The woman stepped back, crossing her arms. "Excuse me, you need to leave right now before I call the police. You are trespassing." "I am not trespassing," I yelled, tightening my grip on Leo. "I live here. I am Clara. Nolan is my husband. Where is he? I just got out of the intensive care unit." Before she could answer, 2 large men in moving company uniforms walked down the stairs carrying the disassembled pieces of a wooden baby crib. My heart stopped. It was the crib I had spent 3 weekends sanding and painting by hand. The non-toxic sage green paint was unmistakable. "What are you doing?" I screamed, lunging forward to block their path. "Put that down. That belongs to my son." The mover looked at the woman in the suit for direction. "Keep taking it out to the truck," she instructed them without batting an eye. "Everything left in the house goes to the dump." I stood in front of the door, blocking the exit. "No. You are stealing my property. I am calling the police right now." I reached for my phone in my pocket. "You are not taking my baby bed. I painted that myself. My husband is going to be home any minute and he will have you all arrested for breaking and entering." The woman let out a harsh, dry laugh. She walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a thick manila folder. She pulled out a stack of documents and shoved them directly against my chest, forcing me to take them or drop them. "Are you crazy or just stupid?" she asked, shaking her head. "Your husband Nolan sold this property to our real estate investment firm 3 days ago. For cash. The transaction is fully complete. We are flipping the lot." The money traded hands and the deed was transferred. "Get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing and child endangerment." I stared at the papers in my hand. The bold black letters at the top read, "Deed of Sale." I looked down at the signature line. There was the signature of Nolan, and right next to it was mine. Clara. It was perfectly executed. The ink was wet. A notary stamp from a bank sat perfectly over the bottom corner. "This is a forgery." I gasped, my eyes scanning the notary seal. "I did not sign this. I have been in a coma for the last 6 days. I physically could not have signed any real estate documents." The woman rolled her eyes. I do not care what your domestic issues are, lady. He had a legally binding power of attorney. He presented it at closing, said you were dealing with postpartum depression, and gave him full financial control to liquidate assets for your medical care. The title company cleared it. The bank cleared it. It is an airtight cash sale. You have no legal right to stand in this hallway. I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. Power of attorney. Nolan had brought me a stack of insurance papers to sign while I was in active labor, right before my blood pressure spiked. He said they were standard hospital consent forms to ensure Leo would be covered under his corporate health plan. I trusted him. I signed where he pointed between intense contractions. He had slipped a power of attorney into the medical stack. As a forensic accountant, I track financial fraud for a living. I literally spend my days tracing hidden offshore accounts, tearing apart shell companies, and exposing corporate embezzlement. I dismantle white-collar criminals for breakfast. And yet my own husband, a mid-level stockbroker with a penchant for greedy shortcuts, had weaponized my medical emergency to steal my own home. I looked at the sale price listed on the deed. $400,000. The house was easily worth $600,000 on the current market. He took a massive loss just to secure an immediate cash buyout. He liquidated the house the moment the doctors put me under. A cold, creeping realization washed over my entire body. If he sold the house for cash using a fraudulent power of attorney, he did not just take the equity. He took everything. I need to use my phone, I whispered, dropping my voice. The woman pointed toward the open front door where the freezing rain continued to pour down. Do it outside, she snapped. I am locking up in 5 minutes. I turned around and walked out onto the wet porch, holding Leo against my chest to protect him from the harsh wind. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were numb and shaking as I swiped the screen. I opened my banking application. My thumb hovered over the login button. The loading screen spun for what felt like an eternity. When the dashboard finally appeared, I stopped breathing. The joint checking account read $0. The joint savings account read $0. Even the college fund account I had opened for Leo, the day I found out I was pregnant, had been completely emptied. $0. I stood on the porch of the house I no longer owned, completely penniless, holding a newborn baby in the freezing rain. Before I could even dial the police, my phone chimed loudly in my hand. A text message notification popped up on the screen. The sender was Nolan. I tapped the message to open it. My blood turned to absolute ice. The image loading on my screen showed my husband holding a tropical drink. He was lounging on a luxury yacht with his arm wrapped tightly around a blonde woman who looked barely 24. The geotag located them in Cabo San Lucas. Below the sickening photograph was a block of text. Thanks for the coma. It gave me time to clear the joint accounts. You cared more about your forensic accounting files than being a proper wife anyway. Keep the kid. He is your burden now. I stared at the message, my mind spinning. The betrayal was complete. The war had just officially begun. I stared at the glowing screen as the freezing Chicago rain plastered my hair to my face. My breath caught, turning into a sharp gasp that burned my lungs. While I was hooked up to life support fighting preeclampsia and praying to survive for our newborn son Nolan, was busy draining our life savings and booking a flight to Cabo. The blonde woman clinging to his neck was Savannah, a junior receptionist at his brokerage firm. Now she wore designer sunglasses paid for with the money I earned tracking down corporate embezzlers. My hands shook violently. I pulled Leo closer, shielding him from the relentless wind. He let out a weak, trembling cry. His tiny lips were turning blue. I tapped my banking application, praying the zero balances were just a network error. I refreshed the screen. The joint checking account 0. The savings account 0. The college fund I seeded with my bonus 0. He left me absolutely nothing. A sick realization washed over me. As a forensic accountant, I knew how difficult it was to move large sums of money without triggering bank fraud alerts. Nolan was a mid-level broker. He was greedy, but he was not a financial mastermind. Someone with top-tier banking access and offshore connections had routed my money out of the country while I was unconscious. Survival had to come first. I shoved my frozen hand into the pocket of my hospital discharge sweatpants. My fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. A single $10 bill and two ones. $12 was my entire net worth. My phone battery icon flashed red. I had no house, no bank accounts, and no car keys. I needed a safe place for my baby immediately. My parents' estate in the wealthy northern suburbs was my only option. My father, Richard, and my mother, Brenda, lived in a sprawling multi-million-dollar mansion. Our relationship had always been strained. They never approved of my aggressive career in forensic accounting, constantly comparing me to my younger sister, Daphne, who married a wealthy hedge fund manager. Surely they would not turn away their own daughter and grandson in a crisis. I opened a ride-share application on my dying phone. The cheapest economy option to my parents' address was $11.40. I hit confirm just as my screen went completely black. I stood on the edge of the driveway, bouncing Leo gently to soothe his crying. The rain turned to sleet, bouncing off my shoulders. Every minute felt like an hour. My incision throbbed with a sharp, burning pain, but I ignored it, focusing entirely on keeping my son warm. Finally, a battered sedan pulled up. I scrambled into the back seat, pulling the door shut against the howling wind. The warmth blasted against my frozen skin, making my fingers tingle painfully. I unwrapped Leo slightly, checking his face. His color returned to a healthy pink, and his breathing steadied. 40 minutes later, the driver pulled up to the towering wrought iron gates of my parents' estate. The property was massive with pristine landscaping and a long circular driveway. Despite the freezing weather, the estate was bustling. Huge heated luxury tents were set up on the expansive front lawn. Valets parked the vehicles. I realized with a sinking feeling that my parents were hosting one of their extravagant autumn galas. I handed the driver my crumpled $12. "Keep the change," I muttered, stepping out into the cold air once again. The contrast between my reality and the scene before me was jarring. I wore damp hospital sweatpants and a stained sweater, holding a baby wrapped in hospital blankets. Around me, wealthy socialites in designer coats and expensive jewelry laughed and sipped champagne, walking toward the heated tents. I kept my head down, hurrying up the long driveway. I just needed to slip into the kitchen. If I found my mother, she would sneak me up to a guest bedroom. "Hey, stop right there!" A sharp, arrogant voice cut through the sound of the rain. I froze, recognizing that voice instantly. It was Jamal, my brother-in-law. Jamal was an African-American hedge fund manager who carried himself with an overwhelming sense of superiority, flaunting his wealth at every opportunity. I turned around. Jamal stood under the massive portico near the front entrance, holding a crystal flute of champagne. He wore a custom-tailored burgundy suit and an expensive gold watch. Beside him stood my younger sister Daphne, wearing a stunning emerald green cocktail dress with a fur shawl. Daphne looked me up and down, her face contorting into a mask of pure disgust. "Clara!" she practically shrieked, stepping back as if my poverty might be contagious. "What on earth are you wearing? You look like a homeless person. You cannot be here right now. Mom and Dad are hosting regional banking executives. You are going to ruin the entire event." I stepped onto the covered porch, seeking shelter from the sleet. "Daphne, please," I said. I pleaded, shivering violently. "I am not here to ruin the party." Nolan forged a power of attorney and sold our house. He emptied our bank accounts and ran away with another woman. I have nothing. I just need a place for Leo to sleep tonight. Daphne rolled her eyes, sipping her champagne. "Oh, please, Clara. You are always so dramatic. Nolan called us days ago. He warned us you were having a massive mental breakdown. He said you were suffering from severe postpartum depression and making up crazy stories." I stared at her in shock. "He told you I was crazy and you believed him." Jamal stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Daphne's waist. He looked down at me with a cold, calculating smirk. "Of course we believed him, Clara. Nolan is a reasonable guy. In fact, he asked for my professional help to secure your family assets before you could do something reckless in your unstable state now." The breath left my lungs. The puzzle pieces suddenly clicked into place. The sophisticated offshore wire transfers, the bypassed bank security, the speed of the liquidation. It all made perfect sense now. "You helped him," I whispered, staring at Jamal in absolute horror. You moved the money. Jamal adjusted his designer lapel, looking completely unbothered by my devastation. I am a hedge fund manager, Clara. I know how to move capital quickly and efficiently. Nolan came to me for advice. He needed to route the funds through a Cayman Islands shell company, so you could not touch a dime. I expedited the transfer. Consider it professional courtesy between brothers. You helped my husband steal my life savings while I was in a coma. I screamed. I was fighting for my life. That money was for my son. Jamal laughed a low, cruel sound. It is just business, Clara. Nolan paid me a generous consulting fee for my services. Besides, you always thought you were so much smarter than everyone else with your fancy forensic accounting job. You spent years looking down on my investment strategies. I guess you were not smart enough to audit your own husband. Daphne giggled, leaning into Jamal. Seriously, Clara, you brought this on yourself. If you had just been a normal, supportive wife instead of working 80-hour weeks chasing corporate criminals, Nolan would not have needed to find a younger woman to comfort him. You drove him away. Now get off our porch before you embarrass us in front of the guests. I clutched Leo to my chest, my heart pounding with a mixture of profound betrayal and blinding rage. My own sister and brother-in-law conspired with my cheating husband to leave me destitute. They engineered my ruin and were now mocking me. I need to see Mom and Dad. I demanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. They will not stand for this. They will not let you throw their grandson out into the freezing rain. Daphne exchanged an amused look with Jamal. Go ahead, she sneered, gesturing toward the grand double doors of the mansion. Let us see what Mom and Dad have to say about their favorite failure coming home to beg for handouts. I pushed past them, entering the warm, luxurious foyer, entirely unaware of the crushing humiliation waiting for me inside now. The massive crystal chandelier above cast a warm golden light over the imported marble floors. The air smelled of expensive catering and fresh lilies, a sharp contrast to the freezing sleet outside. I clutched Leo tighter to my chest, ignoring the puddle of freezing rainwater dripping from my hospital sweatpants onto the pristine entryway rug. Jamal and Daphne followed right behind me, their designer shoes clicking sharply against the stone. They were not going to let me walk away from their mockery that easily. Jamal grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around to face him. He adjusted his heavy gold Rolex and smirked down at me with absolute contempt. You really do not get it, do you, Clara? He whispered harshly, his voice dripping with arrogance. Nolan called me 3 days ago, panicking. He said your postpartum depression made you completely suicidal and erratic. As a hedge fund manager, I know exactly how to move money fast and legally. I personally helped him route your joint funds through a Cayman shell company, so you could not touch a single dime. It is just business. You were a liability to his financial future, and I protect my clients. I stared at him, my mind racing, trying to comprehend the sheer magnitude of his betrayal. You helped him steal my life savings under the guise of protecting me from myself. I asked, my voice trembling with rage. You filed fraudulent transfer authorizations while I was unconscious on a ventilator. Jamal let out a low, cruel laugh. Prove it. He taunted, taking a slow sip of his expensive champagne. Nolan had a legally binding power of attorney. I just provided the sophisticated financial vehicle to secure the assets. You are a forensic accountant, but you are completely powerless here. Your money is gone and it is never coming back. You have zero evidence and zero authority to question my firm. Daphne stepped up beside her husband, swirling the champagne in her crystal flute. She looked at my soaked clothes and sneered, wrinkling her nose. You always had to ruin our parties, Clara. You just could not stand seeing anyone else happy. Just like when you skipped my lavish bridal shower 3 years ago to audit some boring fraud case. You always put your miserable job ahead of your own family. Now look at you. You are a penniless single mother, begging for handouts in the foyer of our parents' house. It is truly pathetic to witness. I ignored my sister, turning my back on their venomous smiles. I scanned the crowded rooms, searching for the only people who could possibly help me now. Through the archway leading into the grand dining room, I spotted my parents. Richard and Brenda were holding court among a group of wealthy regional banking executives. My father wore a sharp custom tuxedo, and my mother was draped in a tailored evening gown glittering with diamonds. I took a deep breath, holding my crying newborn close, and marched directly into the dining room. Mom. Dad. I called out, my voice cracking slightly from the lingering damage of the breathing tube. The cheerful chatter in the room instantly died. The banking executives turned to stare at me, their expressions shifting from polite interest to visible shock. I looked like a deranged vagrant wandering into a high society gala. My mother Brenda dropped her polite smile immediately. Her face contorted into a mask of absolute horror as she took in my appearance. "Clara, what on earth are you doing here looking like that?" Brenda hissed, stepping away from her wealthy guests and grabbing my arm. She pulled me roughly toward the hallway, desperate to hide me from her friends. "You are humiliating us in front of the entire country club board. Mom, please, I need help." I pleaded, ignoring the harsh grip she had on my arm. "Nolan forged a power of attorney while I was in a coma. He sold my house for cash and emptied every single bank account. Jamal helped him hide the money offshore. I have absolutely nothing left and Leo is freezing. We need a place to stay just for a few nights until I can contact the authorities." My father Richard marched into the hallway, his face flushed with extreme anger. He glared down at me, completely ignoring the tiny infant shivering in my arms. "Have you lost your mind, Clara?" Richard demanded, his voice a harsh whisper. "Bursting in here during the most important networking event of the year, spouting insane accusations against your husband and your brother-in-law. Jamal is a highly respected hedge fund manager. Nolan is a successful broker. You are having a mental breakdown just like Nolan said you would. He is lying." I cried, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. I was in a medically induced coma for 6 days. I almost died from preeclampsia. Nolan used my medical emergency to steal my home and my money. He is in Cabo right now with a 24-year-old receptionist named Savannah. I can prove it. I pulled out my dead phone, frantically pressing the power button, but the screen remained black and lifeless. Brenda sighed, rubbing her temples in profound annoyance. "I warned you, Clara," she said, her tone dripping with toxic disappointment. "I told you for years that your aggressive career was going to ruin your marriage. If you had just quit that ridiculous accounting job and learned to be a submissive, supportive wife like Daphne, Nolan would not have looked elsewhere for comfort. You drove him away with your constant working and your demanding attitude. We do not harbor failed wives in this family. You are a complete embarrassment to everything we have built." I stared at my mother, unable to process the sheer cruelty of her words. I was the victim of a massive financial crime orchestrated by my own husband, and she was blaming me for working too hard. "You are choosing them over your own daughter and your newborn grandson," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You are going to throw a 6-day-old baby out into the freezing sleet." Richard crossed his arms, his expression devoid of any paternal warmth. "You brought this entirely upon yourself, Clara," he stated coldly. "You chose your career over your husband, and now you are facing the consequences of your selfish actions. Even if I wanted to help you, all of my liquid capital is currently tied up in Jamal's hedge fund. He is generating 30% returns for us. I am not going to jeopardize my financial relationship with my son-in-law to fund your dramatic divorce proceedings. You need to leave my property right now before I call the security guards." Jamal and Daphne had followed us into the hallway, standing just a few feet away and watching my absolute devastation with smug satisfaction. Daphne took a slow sip of her champagne, clearly enjoying the show. "I told you she was going to ruin the night, Mom," Daphne chimed in. "She is just jealous because my husband is a financial genius, and hers ran off with a younger woman." Jamal stepped forward, pulling a sleek leather wallet from the inside pocket of his custom suit. He opened it and pulled out a single, crumpled $50 bill. He looked at me with a sickening mixture of pity and contempt. He held the bill out between two fingers, then deliberately dropped it onto the imported marble floor right at my feet. "Take a bus to a women's shelter, Clara," Jamal said, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. "Buy some formula for the kid. Just do not stand here and bleed on my Italian leather shoes. We have important guests waiting, and your presence is ruining the aesthetic of the evening." I looked down at the crumpled green bill lying on the cold marble floor. My stomach churned with a blinding, sickening rage. My own parents had just validated the theft of my life savings and blamed me for my husband's infidelity. My sister and her arrogant husband were treating me like discarded garbage. They expected me to break down crying. They expected me to drop to my knees and pick up that $50 bill like a desperate beggar. I did not shed a single tear. The initial shock and panic had completely evaporated, leaving behind an ocean of cold, calculating determination. I was a forensic accountant. I spent my entire adult life hunting down arrogant men who thought they were smarter than the law. Jamal and Nolan thought they had committed the perfect crime because they used family ties and medical emergencies to cover their tracks. But they had made one massive, fatal mistake. They left me alive with my skills intact. The hunt for justice had officially begun. I stepped over the crumpled $50 bill, leaving it untouched on the immaculate marble floor. I did not look back at my mother Brenda as she gasped in offended shock, nor did I spare a single glance for my father Richard, whose silence was the ultimate betrayal. I ignored the arrogant chuckle escaping Jamal's throat and the smug, triumphant smirk painted across Daphne's face. I simply turned around, holding Leo tightly against my chest, and walked straight out the heavy double doors of the mansion. The freezing sleet immediately battered my face as I marched down the long circular driveway. The luxury heated tents and the wealthy banking executives faded into the background. My legs trembled with exhaustion, and the surgical incision on my abdomen burned with a blinding white-hot agony, but I forced myself to keep moving. I had no car, no bank accounts, and no family, but I was far from defeated. I walked through the Chicago wind. My hospital sweatpants were soaked through. I kept my head bowed, shielding my newborn son from the harsh elements. Leo had fallen asleep against my collarbone, his steady breathing anchoring me to reality. I needed shelter formula and capital to launch my counterattack against Nolan and Jamal. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond engagement ring and matching platinum band still encircled my finger. Nolan bragged that the flawless diamond cost $15,000. It was the only asset I had left that he could not digitize or route through a Cayman Islands shell company. I spotted the flickering red neon sign of a 24-hour pawn shop on the corner of a dilapidated strip mall. I pushed the heavy glass door open, and a harsh electronic bell chimed. Behind thick bulletproof glass sat a large man with a skeptical scowl. He clearly saw a desperate target. I slipped the diamond ring and platinum band off my finger and slid both pieces through the small metal slot. The pawnbroker examined the stones under a bright desk lamp with a jeweler loupe. He dropped the rings onto a digital scale. "The market is flooded with these right now," he muttered. "I can give you $800 cash for both pieces. Take it or leave it." I stared directly into his eyes, tapping into the same cold professional demeanor I used when auditing hostile corporate executives. "The center stone is a brilliant cut diamond." I stated, my voice perfectly level. "The setting is pure platinum. The retail value is $15,000. The scrap melt value alone is worth triple what you just offered me. I am a forensic accountant. Do not insult my intelligence. $2,000 cash right now." I replied, my tone leaving zero room for debate. "You will flip that set to a wholesaler by noon tomorrow for at least $6,000. You quadruple your money in 12 hours, and I walk out of here with enough cash to keep my son safe tonight. Give me $2,000 in untraceable bills, or I will take my business elsewhere." He stared at me for a long, tense moment before letting out a short, gruff laugh. "You drive a hard bargain, lady." He opened a steel safe, pulling out a stack of crisp bills and sliding $2,100 bills through the slot. "Do you want the velvet box back?" he grunted. "Throw it in the trash," I said, securing the cash in my pocket. I felt zero sentimentality toward the jewelry that had symbolized a massive lie. $2,000 was a lifeline, but it was not enough to fight a prolonged legal battle in Chicago against Jamal and his unlimited hedge fund resources. I hailed a passing taxi, using $20 to secure a ride to the downtown Greyhound bus station. My plan was to buy a one-way ticket to New York. A former college professor of mine owned a small brownstone in Brooklyn and had always offered me a spare room. I knew she would take me in and let me use her internet access to begin my digital investigation into Jamal's offshore routing scheme. The bus station was chaotic and loud, Fluorescent lights cast a sickly pale glow over the crowded waiting areas. I joined the long, winding line for the ticket counter, adjusting Leo in my arms. As I neared the front of the line, a loud commotion erupted near the primary ticketing desk. A burly station security guard was aggressively shoving an elderly man away from the counter. The old man looked disheveled, wearing a stained, oversized wool coat that hung awkwardly on his thin frame. He looked exactly like the dozens of displaced vagrants seeking shelter from the winter weather. "Please, you have to listen to me." The old man pleaded, his voice surprisingly strong despite his fragile appearance. "I was mugged exactly 3 blocks from here. They took my wallet, my phone, and my identification. I must get on the Midnight Express to Manhattan. It is a matter of absolute life and death." The security guard rolled his eyes, grabbing the old man by the shoulder. "Yeah, I have heard it all before, buddy. Every beggar in Chicago has a life and death emergency. Move along before I have you arrested." The crowd of travelers waiting in line began to mutter in agreement. "Just kick the crazy homeless guy out." A businessman in a cheap suit yelled, "Some of us have actual places to be tonight." The old man stumbled backward as the security guard shoved him again. "I must be in New York by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The board of directors is voting to dismantle my entire life's work at 9. It is a hostile takeover orchestrated from the inside. I just need a single ticket." The crowd laughed, a collective, cruel sound of mockery. The mockery was visceral, reminding me instantly of Jamal and Daphne laughing at my devastation just a few hours ago. I looked closely at the old man. Despite the stained coat, my analytical training kicked into high gear. I noticed details everyone else ignored. His posture was perfectly straight, commanding authority. His vocabulary was precise. But the most telling detail was on his feet. High were dark leather Oxford shoes. They were scuffed, but the stitching was immaculate. They were bespoke, custom-made shoes that cost at least $3,000. A vagrant did not wear custom Italian leather. The security guard raised his radio, preparing to call for police backup. I stepped out of the line, walking directly past the mocking crowd and the annoyed ticket agent. I inserted myself between the aggressive security guard and the desperate old man. "I will pay for his ticket," I announced, my voice slicing through the noise with absolute authority. The guard paused, looking at my damp clothes and the newborn baby strapped to my chest. "You are going to buy this guy a bus pass to New York?" the guard asked skeptically. "It is $150, lady." I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills from the pawn shop, cash, placing them firmly on the ticket counter. "One direct ticket on the Midnight Express to Manhattan, please," I instructed. The old man stared at me, his intelligent gray eyes widening in profound shock. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" he asked, his voice dropping to a hushed, reverent whisper. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the entire world on your shoulders. You clearly need this money more than I do." I secured the change and handed the printed boarding pass directly to the old man. "Because someone once told me that hitting rock bottom is just a solid foundation to rebuild on," I replied, meeting his gaze. "And because I know exactly what it feels like to have an entire room full of people laugh at you while everything you built is being stolen behind your back." The old man took the ticket, his hands trembling slightly. "What is your name?" he asked, reaching for a pen chained to the counter. He flipped the cardboard boarding pass over. "Clara," I said simply. "And my son is Leo." The old man carefully wrote the names Clara and Leo on the back of his ticket stub. He looked back up at me, his expression entirely transformed, piercing and terrifyingly sharp. "Thank you, Clara," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I promise you this investment will yield a higher return than you can possibly imagine." He turned and rushed toward the boarding gates. 3 weeks later, I was living in a cheap cinderblock motel on the outskirts of Brooklyn, running complex digital trace algorithms to hunt down the offshore routing numbers Jamal used. Suddenly, a sleek black Maybach limousine pulled up right outside my peeling motel door. A driver stepped out into the rain. The driver approached my peeling motel door with purposeful strides, ignoring the heavy Brooklyn rain soaking his expensive dark suit. He did not knock. Instead, he stood perfectly still as I cautiously opened the door, clutching Leo against my shoulder. He held out a sleek military-grade satellite tablet. The screen was already glowing. "Take it, Clara," he instructed, his voice smooth and professional over the pouring rain. "He is waiting for you." I hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching out and taking the heavy device. The driver turned around and walked back to the idling Maybach, leaving me standing in the doorway. I looked down at the high-definition screen. A secure encrypted video call was already active. Sitting on the other end was not the desperate vagrant I met at the station 3 weeks ago. The man on the screen sat behind a massive mahogany desk in a glass-walled skyscraper office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He wore a bespoke navy blue suit, and his silver hair was impeccably styled. His sharp, intelligent gray eyes locked onto mine through the camera. "You look much better without the stained wool coat," I noted dryly, refusing to show any intimidation. The old man let out a rich, booming laugh that echoed through the small speaker. "And you look exactly like the fierce, brilliant woman who saved my life with a $150 bus ticket," he replied, leaning forward. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. I am Elias Thorne, the Chief Executive Officer and primary shareholder of Thorne Capital. My company manages over $40 billion in global assets." That night at the station, my own board of directors attempted a hostile takeover. They orchestrated a targeted mugging to strip me of my identification and communication devices, hoping I would miss the emergency shareholder vote the next morning. Your bus ticket got me into that boardroom with exactly 4 minutes to spare. I crushed the rebellion and fired half my board before noon. I absorbed the information, processing the scale of his power. "I am glad your investment paid off, Mr. Thorne," I said, keeping my tone measured. "But I am currently running trace algorithms on a stolen laptop in a motel that smells like mildew and bleach. I doubt you tracked me down just to express your gratitude." Elias smiled, his eyes gleaming with predatory approval. "You are entirely correct, Clara. I did not just call to say thank you. I ran a comprehensive background check on you the moment I secured my position. I know exactly who you are. You are the relentless forensic accountant who dismantled the tri-state money laundering ring 3 years ago. You are a financial ghost, a hunter who sees patterns where others see clean ledgers. And right now, I need a hunter." I adjusted Leo in my arms. "Why would a billionaire chief executive need a forensic accountant living in a cheap motel?" I asked. Elias pulled a file across his desk. "Because one of my subsidiary hedge funds is bleeding capital, and my internal auditors are too incompetent or too corrupt to find the leak. Federal regulators are starting to ask questions. The fund manager is a man named Jamal." The sound of my arrogant brother-in-law's name sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. Elias continued, his voice turning deadly serious. "Jamal's books look absolutely immaculate on the surface. But I know he is using an external broker to wash the money through offshore shell companies. I need someone entirely outside my organization to rip his financial structures apart. I need someone with the skills to follow the digital blood trail and the motivation to destroy him completely." I stared at the screen, my mind racing as the ultimate weapon was practically handed to me on a silver platter. "He is using my ex-husband, Nolan," I stated, absolute certainty ringing in my voice. "Nolan is a broker with mid-level clearance, but a high tolerance for risky shortcuts. Jamal routed my stolen life savings through Cayman Island shells as a test run. They are working together." Elias nodded slowly. "Then we have a mutual interest in burning their empires to the ground." He leaned into the camera, his expression hardening into pure business. "I am offering you a contract, Clara. I will pay you a $2 million upfront retainer transferred immediately into a secure account of your choosing. Furthermore, you will receive 20% of every single dollar you successfully recover from Jamal's fraudulent operations. You will have supreme administrative access to the Thorne Capital Underground database. You will have unlimited resources. Expose them. Give me the evidence to lock them in federal prison for decades." I did not hesitate. "I accept your terms, Mr. Thorne," I replied. Within 2 hours, the driver relocated Leo and me to a hyper-secure luxury penthouse in the heart of Manhattan. The apartment featured bulletproof glass biometric security locks and a team of vetted professionals, including a top-tier nanny, to care for Leo while I worked. But the most important room was the dedicated command center Elias had prepared for me. 6 massive monitors glowed in the dim light connected directly to the Thorn Capital mainframe. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair, cracking my knuckles. The $2 million retainer had already cleared into my newly established secure accounts, ensuring Leo would never know poverty again. Now it was time to go hunting. I launched a deep dive trace algorithm, plunging into the encrypted layers of Jamal's hedge fund ledgers. For 4 days, I barely slept, fueled by espresso and a burning desire for absolute justice. I bypassed Jamal's decoy account, slicing through the sophisticated financial webbing he had constructed to fool the federal regulators. What I found hidden beneath the pristine surface was far worse than simple corporate embezzlement. I picked up the encrypted phone line, calling Elias directly. "The situation is catastrophic, Elias," I reported, my eyes scanning the cascading lines of data on my screens. "Jamal is not a financial genius generating 30% returns. He is not generating any real market returns at all. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. He is using the capital from new investors to pay off the early investors, fabricating the profit margins entirely. And Nolan is the primary launderer, taking a flat 15% cut to route the stolen money through non-existent commercial real estate holdings in the Caribbean." Elias was silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the fraud. "Can you trace the primary capital sources?" he demanded. "Who are the anchor investors feeding Jamal's scheme right now?" I initiated a reverse trace protocol, pulling up the master list of Jamal's largest recent capital injections. The names populated on my right monitor. I froze, my blood running cold as I recognized the 2 names sitting at the very top of the victim list: Richard and Brenda. My parents. I stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. My parents had completely liquidated their entire personal life savings. They had foolishly cashed out their retirement accounts and taken out a massive second mortgage on their multi-million-dollar estate. They handed every single cent over to their golden son-in-law, completely blinded by his arrogant promises of guaranteed 30% returns. Jamal was clearly not investing their money. I was instead feeding it directly into the Ponzi scheme, using their generational wealth to keep the fraudulent operation afloat, while Nolan siphoned the cash offshore. My parents were completely broke. They just did not realize it yet. As I absorbed this staggering revelation, my personal laptop chimed with an incoming email notification. The sender was my sister Daphne. I opened the message. It was a digital invitation, featuring ornate gold lettering and a photograph of my parents smiling pretentiously. The header read, "You are cordially invited to the 40th wedding anniversary gala of Richard and Brenda. The event was scheduled for this coming Saturday at the most exclusive country club in Chicago." Below the formal invitation, Daphne had typed a mocking personal message. "Mom and Dad said if you come and publicly apologize for embarrassing us at the last party, Jamal might consider hiring you as a night shift receptionist at his hedge fund. We heard you are living in a filthy motel, so maybe you need the minimum wage. Oh, and Nolan and his gorgeous new fiancée Savannah are attending as our guests of honor. Savannah is wearing the $15,000 diamond ring Nolan bought with his latest bonus. Do not make a scene in your cheap thrift store clothes, Clara. Know your place." I read the venomous email twice. I did not throw my phone. I did not scream or cry. I simply smiled, a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. Daphne wanted me to know my place. I was about to show her exactly where I stood. I clicked the reply button and typed a single word: yes. I forwarded the RSVP confirmation to Daphne, ensuring she knew I was walking right into her trap. Then I picked up my secure phone line and dialed a highly classified number. "Special Agent Reynolds," I said when the gruff voice answered on the other end. "This is Clara. I have a complete 500-page encrypted dossier detailing a massive active Ponzi scheme involving interstate wire fraud, offshore money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. I have the digital ledgers, the shell company routing numbers, and the exact coordinates of the perpetrators. I need you to coordinate a synchronized asset freeze and prepare federal arrest warrants." The federal agent on the line immediately shifted into high gear. "We have been trying to nail Jamal for a year, but his books always looked clean," Reynolds replied, his voice tight with anticipation. When do you want to drop the hammer, Clara? I leaned back in my chair, looking at the digital invitation glowing on my screen. This Saturday night, I instructed coldly. Exactly at 9 o'clock. I want the asset freeze to trigger while they are standing in a room full of their wealthiest investors. I want them to lose everything in front of the entire world. Special Agent Reynolds let out a sharp breath over the encrypted line. Consider it done, Clara. The federal warrants are fully processed and signed by a federal judge. The Securities and Exchange Commission has approved the immediate synchronization of the asset freeze. We have tactical units positioned 2 blocks away from the country club right now. When the clock strikes exactly 9, we execute the digital lock. Jamal and Nolan will not be able to move a single penny. I thanked him and disconnected the secure line. The trap was flawlessly set. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and exhaled. For the past 3 weeks, I had existed on pure adrenaline and black coffee, tracking every fraudulent transaction Jamal had orchestrated. I mapped every offshore shell company Nolan used to wash the stolen capital. My own parents had eagerly handed over their entire life savings to a charismatic fraudster simply because Jamal drove a Ferrari and promised impossible returns. They betrayed me for the illusion of elite wealth. Tonight, that illusion would shatter. A soft knock on the reinforced door pulled me from my thoughts. Elias Thorne walked into the command center. The billionaire chief executive looked at the cascading data streams on my 6 monitors with a nod of profound respect. "You have executed a masterpiece, Clara," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "You dissected a massive financial conspiracy that baffled my best internal auditors. But tonight is not just about federal justice. It is about personal reclamation." Elias signaled to his executive assistant, who walked into the room carrying a heavy garment bag and a locked velvet case. "They broke you down to build their fake empires," Elias said, gesturing to the items. "You cannot walk into that country club looking like the victim they expect. Tonight, you do not just attend a party, you execute a high society demolition." I opened the garment bag. Inside hung a breathtaking custom-tailored crimson evening gown. It was a masterpiece of haute couture designed to command absolute attention. I unclasped the velvet case, revealing a diamond necklace that caught the ambient light and fractured it into a million brilliant sparks. "These are from the Thorne Capital corporate vault," Elias explained. "Wear them as armor. Let them see exactly what true power looks like before you rip their fraudulent world to shreds." Saturday evening arrived with a chilling wind sweeping off Lake Michigan. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, looking out over the glittering city skyline. I wore the crimson gown, and the heavy diamond necklace resting against my collarbone felt like a physical manifestation of my new reality. I walked into the nursery and kissed my sleeping son Leo on his warm forehead. The elite security team and the private nanny assured me he was perfectly safe. I turned and walked out the door, stepping into the private elevator. The black Maybach limousine was waiting for me at the curb. The driver held the door open, and I slid into the luxurious leather interior. The drive to the exclusive country club in the wealthy northern suburbs took 40 minutes. My pulse remained remarkably steady. I was not the terrified, penniless woman crying in the freezing rain 3 weeks ago. I was a weapon forged in the fires of their betrayal. The limousine pulled up to the grand entrance of the country club. The venue was obscenely lavish, featuring massive stone pillars and valet attendants rushing to park luxury vehicles. Society photographers flashed their cameras near the red carpet, capturing the arrival of Chicago's financial elite. When my driver opened the door and I stepped out onto the pavement, the atmosphere instantly shifted. The photographers scrambled to capture my image, whispering furiously to one another about the stunning woman draped in millions of dollars of diamonds. I kept my posture perfectly straight, projecting absolute unbothered confidence. I handed my coat to the valet and walked through the ornate double doors of the country club. The grand ballroom was a spectacular display of excessive wealth. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables draped in fine silk linens and towering floral centerpieces. A live jazz band played softly in the corner. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne and expensive caviar. I scanned the crowded ballroom, locating my targets instantly. My parents, Richard and Brenda, stood near the main stage holding court among their wealthy friends. They looked smug and triumphant, celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary with money they no longer actually possessed. A few feet away stood my sister Daphne and her husband Jamal. Jamal wore a custom white tuxedo jacket, looking every bit the arrogant hedge fund manager he pretended to be. He laughed loudly at a joke, slapping another investor on the back. Then I saw him. Nolan, my cheating ex-husband, stood by the ice sculpture with his arm securely wrapped around Savannah. Savannah wore a tight, sparkling dress and held her left hand up conspicuously to show off the massive diamond engagement ring Nolan had purchased using my stolen life savings. I took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and walked directly toward the center of the room. The crimson gown demanded attention. As I moved through the crowd, conversations abruptly ceased. People turned to stare, trying to identify the wealthy stranger in their midst. It only took a few seconds for the ripples of silence to reach my family. Daphne was the first to recognize me. Her jaw dropped, and the champagne glass in her hand tilted, spilling expensive liquor onto her designer shoes. Clara! Daphne gasped, her voice carrying over the soft jazz music. What on earth are you doing here? Her shriek drew the attention of Jamal, Nolan, and my parents. They all turned in unison, their expressions shifting from arrogant celebration to absolute shock. I stopped a few feet away from them, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. Good evening, Daphne. I replied, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet of the ballroom. I received your lovely email invitation. I decided to RSVP in person. I hope I am not underdressed. Jamal stepped forward, his chest puffed out in a display of aggressive dominance. Security should have kept the trash outside. He sneered, looking me up and down. Did you rent that dress with your government food stamps, Clara? You came crawling back here for a handout. You are not getting a dime from my hedge fund or your parents. I looked at Jamal with a pitying smile. Your hedge fund, Jamal. That is a very generous term for a glorified offshore washing machine. Nolan shoved his way past Jamal, his face red with sudden anger. You have a lot of nerve showing up here, Clara. He barked, stepping aggressively close to me. I took everything from you. I left you with absolutely nothing. You do not belong in a room like this anymore. Get out before I have you thrown out. Savannah clung to Nolan's arm, flashing her engagement ring in my face. Seriously, Clara, she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You are embarrassing yourself. Nolan upgraded. You need to accept that you lost and go back to whatever filthy motel you are hiding in. Brenda pushed her way to the front of the group, her face contorted in rage. Clara, you are ruining our 40th anniversary, she hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid alerting the nearby guests. We told you to stay away. You are a failed wife and a disgrace to this family. If you do not leave this instant, I will have the police remove you for trespassing. I checked the diamond watch on my left wrist. It was exactly 8:55, 5 minutes until the federal hammer dropped. I am not trespassing, Mother, I replied smoothly, my voice echoing slightly, as the surrounding crowd fell completely silent, listening to the drama unfold. In fact, I have a very special anniversary gift for you and Dad, and an early wedding present for my deceitful ex-husband. I turned away from their furious faces and walked deliberately toward the main stage. The band leader saw me approaching and intuitively stepped back. I climbed the short stairs and grabbed the microphone from the stand. The high-pitched feedback whined for a second, silencing the entire ballroom completely. I tapped the side of the microphone, ensuring it was on. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? My voice boomed over the massive speaker system vibrating through the floors. I am Clara, and I have something fascinating to show you all regarding the incredible financial genius of Jamal and Nolan. It is a magic trick you absolutely must see to believe. The clock ticked closer to 9 o'clock. I pulled out my encrypted phone, waiting for the final seconds to pass. The destruction was finally here. I pressed the execute button. I stared at the glowing screen of the satellite tablet. The peeling paint of my cheap motel room suddenly felt a million miles away. Elias Thorne, the billionaire chief executive of Thorne Capital, sat behind his massive mahogany desk looking at me with predatory approval. I did not just call to say thank you, Clara. He repeated, his voice projecting absolute authority through the small speakers. I ran a background check on you. You are the forensic accountant who busted the tri-state money laundering ring 3 years ago. I need a ghost. I need a hunter, because I think your brother-in-law Jamal is embezzling from my company. The sound of Jamal's name sent a violent jolt of adrenaline straight through my veins. The arrogant hedge fund manager had stood on his pristine porch and laughed while I shivered in the freezing rain. He had gladly helped my cheating husband steal my home and my life savings. Now the man who owned the very ground Jamal walked on was handing me the key to his destruction. Why would a billionaire need a disgraced accountant living in a Brooklyn motel, I asked, keeping my tone perfectly measured. Because my internal auditors are entirely useless, Elias replied, leaning closer to his camera. Jamal's hedge fund is a highly profitable subsidiary of Thorne Capital. At least it appears profitable on paper. The Securities and Exchange Commission is getting suspicious. They are circling my firm asking quiet questions about unusual capital flow. Jamal's books look absolutely immaculate to my risk management team, but I know he is washing the money. He is bleeding my company dry, using an external entity to clean the stolen capital before it hits the offshore accounts. I need someone completely disconnected from my corporate structure to rip his financial facades apart. My mind raced, connecting the invisible dots faster than a supercomputer, the sophisticated wire transfers, the rapid liquidation of my suburban house, the Cayman Islands Shell Company. He is using Nolan, I stated, my voice ringing with cold certainty. Nolan is my ex-husband. He is a mid-level broker with an appetite for high-risk shortcuts. Jamal routed my stolen life savings through Cayman Island shells as a test run for a much larger operation. They are working together. Jamal is the architect and Nolan is the mule. Elias nodded slowly, a dangerous smile spreading across his weathered face. Then we have a mutual interest in burning their empires to the ground, Clara. He leaned back in his executive chair, folding his hands together. I am offering you a contract right here and right now. I will pay you a $2 million upfront retainer. The funds will be transferred immediately into a secure account of your choosing, ensuring you and your son never face poverty again. Furthermore, you will receive 20% of every single dollar you successfully recover from Jamal's fraudulent operations. I looked down at Leo sleeping soundly against my chest. I thought about the $50 bill Jamal had thrown into the dirt at my feet. I thought about Nolan sipping cocktails in Cabo with his young mistress. I accept your terms, Mr. Thorne, I replied without a single second of hesitation. Excellent, Elias said. The driver outside is at your complete disposal. Pack whatever you need. You are moving out of that miserable motel tonight. We have a lot of work to do. The screen went black. I handed the tablet back to the driver, who had been waiting patiently just outside the door. I had nothing to pack except a few cheap baby supplies and the clothes on my back. Within 10 minutes, I was sitting in the climate-controlled luxury of the black Maybach limousine. The driver navigated through the heavy rain, leaving the rundown Brooklyn neighborhood far behind. We crossed into Manhattan, pulling into the private underground parking garage of a towering glass skyscraper. A team of silent security personnel escorted me into a private elevator. The doors opened directly into a sprawling, hyper-secure penthouse suite overlooking the glittering city skyline. The apartment was breathtaking, featuring bulletproof glass, biometric security locks, and imported Italian marble floors. A warm, middle-aged woman wearing a neat uniform waited in the grand foyer. "Welcome, Miss Clara," she said with a kind, reassuring smile. "I am Beatrice. Mr. Thorne hired me through an elite agency to serve as your private nanny. I have 20 years of experience with newborns and full pediatric emergency training. I have prepared a sterile nursery down the hall with fresh clothes formula and a state-of-the-art monitoring system. Your son is entirely safe here." For the first time in nearly a month, the crushing, suffocating weight of maternal anxiety lifted off my chest. I handed Leo to Beatrice, watching as she expertly cradled him, and walked toward the beautifully decorated nursery. My son was safe. He was warm, fed, and protected by billionaire-level security. I no longer had to operate in survival mode. I could finally shift all of my energy into purely offensive maneuvers. Elias Thorne walked into the penthouse foyer a few moments later. He looked even more imposing in person than he did on the video screen. He bypassed the formal greetings and gestured for me to follow him down a long corridor. "They broke you down to build their fake empires, Clara," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet hallway. "Now I am going to give you the tools to break them." He opened a heavy soundproof door at the end of the hall. I stepped inside and my breath caught in my throat. It was not a home office. It was a dedicated financial war room. 6 massive high-definition monitors formed a semicircle on a sleek glass desk. A state-of-the-art server tower hummed quietly in the corner, connected directly to the Thorn Capital Underground database. The room was soundproofed, temperature-controlled, and heavily encrypted against external surveillance. This command center has supreme administrative access to every single ledger account and routing number under the Thorn Capital umbrella, Elias explained, standing beside me. "You have unlimited resources. I need you to find out exactly how Jamal is hiding the stolen capital from the federal regulators. I need the digital blood trail. I need irrefutable evidence to lock him and your ex-husband in federal prison for decades." I walked over to the ergonomic leather chair and sat down. The soft glow of the 6 monitors illuminated the dark room. I cracked my knuckles, feeling a surge of pure, focused adrenaline. "Jamal is arrogant," I explained to Elias, my eyes scanning the initial login protocols on the primary screen. "Arrogant men always make the same fundamental mistake. They think they are the smartest people in the room. Jamal believes his offshore routing is untraceable because he uses layered shell companies. But every digital transaction leaves a footprint. Money never simply vanishes, Mr. Thorne. It only changes shape." Elias rested his hands on the back of my chair. "The federal agencies are circling Jamal right now. They know something is wrong, but they lack the technical capability to pierce his corporate veil. Jamal has insulated himself perfectly. If he suspects we are auditing him, he will execute a burn protocol and destroy the servers. You must remain completely undetected. You are a ghost in his machine, Clara." I pulled up the primary command terminal, typing rapidly across the keyboard. "I will start by reverse engineering the Cayman Islands Shell Company. Nolan used to steal my house equity. That transaction was sloppy and rushed. Nolan is greedy and lazy. He definitely reused the same offshore pathways to wash Jamal's hedge fund money. Once I compromise Nolan's digital access point, I can tunnel directly into Jamal's master ledgers without triggering the internal security alarms." Elias smiled, a cold, predatory expression. "Rip their financial facades apart, Clara. Leave them absolutely nothing." He turned and walked out of the war room, closing the heavy soundproof door behind him. I was completely alone in the quiet, dark space. The only sound was the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard and the low hum of the massive servers. I logged into the highly restricted Thorn Capital database, using the supreme administrative credentials Elias had provided. The sheer volume of financial data cascading across my screens was staggering, but I felt perfectly at home. This was my element. I was a forensic accountant, and I was about to dismantle the men who thought they could discard me like garbage. I initiated a deep dive trace algorithm, targeting the specific banking institutions in Cabo San Lucas, where Nolan was currently vacationing with his mistress Savannah. I tracked his recent credit card expenditures, pulling up the receipts for his luxury yacht rentals and expensive champagne. Every dollar he spent was stolen from my son. Every diamond he bought for Savannah was purchased with my blood and sweat. I linked his current spending habits back to the initial fraudulent real estate transaction that liquidated my suburban home. The digital thread glowed brightly on my monitor, leading directly to a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. I isolated the holding company and deployed a decryption program to bypass its basic security firewalls. Nolan was indeed lazy. He used the exact same password protocol for his illicit banking that he used for his home streaming services. I breached the offshore account in less than 12 minutes. The moment I accessed the Cayman ledger, the entire scope of the operation began to unfold before my eyes. The account was not just holding my dollars. It was holding tens of millions of dollars, routed systematically from Jamal's Chicago-based hedge fund. The money was moving in complex layered bursts, designed to look like legitimate international investments. But I could see the truth hidden in the data. The hunt was officially on. I leaned closer to the screens, my eyes tracking the massive sums of stolen wealth flying across international borders. Jamal and Nolan thought they were untouchable kings of the financial world. They thought they had buried me so deep I would never see the light of day again. But they had handed a loaded weapon to the one person who knew exactly where to aim. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a mother with nothing left to lose. I tapped the execute key on my keyboard, plunging deeper into the dark web of their corporate fraud. The demolition had finally begun today, and they would pay for everything they stole. The demolition began today, and they would pay for everything they stole. I leaned closer to the 6 glowing monitors, illuminating the dark command center. The green code cascading down the screens reflected in my eyes. I initiated the secondary decryption protocol. Nolan was a careless amateur, but Jamal was a different breed of criminal entirely. Jamal built walls within walls. He constructed digital financial labyrinths, meticulously designed to confuse federal regulators and internal risk management teams. But I was not a federal regulator, restricted by bureaucratic red tape and standard operating procedures. I was a financial ghost, operating with supreme administrative access, provided by the billionaire who owned the very servers Jamal was exploiting to commit his crimes. I had the power to see everything hidden. My fingers flew across the keyboard, striking the keys with rapid precision. I isolated the offshore shell company Nolan used to steal my house equity just days ago. That single fraudulent transaction was the loose thread I needed to pull. I pulled it hard. The digital fabric of their entire covert operation began to unravel right in front of me. I easily bypassed the first decoy ledger Jamal had set up. It was a masterpiece of fabricated profit margins and false stability. To a standard internal auditor, the hedge fund looked wildly successful. The market returns were consistently high. The risk models were perfectly balanced and completely reassuring. But my career in forensic accounting is not about looking at what is presented on the surface. My expertise is about relentlessly searching for what is intentionally missing from the bigger picture. The numbers told a dark story of unbridled greed and absolute arrogance. I deployed a highly aggressive recursive search algorithm to cross-reference the outgoing international wire transfers with the incoming domestic capital deposits. The numbers simply did not align. There was a massive discrepancy hidden in the structural math. I dug much deeper, breaching a hidden subdirectory masked as a routine corporate payroll account. What I found hidden inside that locked folder made my jaw clench with pure disgust. Jamal had created hundreds of dummy corporations scattered across multiple international jurisdictions. He generated thousands of fake invoices for consulting services that were never actually rendered by anyone. He flooded the automated payroll system with ghost employees who did not exist in the real world. Every single one of these phantom entities was strategically designed to bleed massive amounts of capital out of the primary Thorn Capital subsidiary, without triggering any automated security alarms or raising flags. But the stolen money was moving entirely too fast. Standard corporate embezzlement usually involves slowly skimming small amounts off the top to avoid immediate detection. Jamal was instead moving massive chunks of capital in rapid, frantic succession. I ran a complex velocity analysis on the transaction logs over the past 12 months. The pattern was incredibly chaotic, but it was also mathematically deliberate. Fresh capital would enter the hedge fund from newly recruited wealthy investors eager for high returns. Within 48 hours, a large percentage of that exact same capital would be wired out to cover the quarterly dividend payouts for the older established investors, to keep them completely unaware of the underlying massive deception. I stopped typing. The quiet hum of the state-of-the-art server tower in the corner of the room seemed to amplify in the heavy silence. The air in the secure command center felt suddenly thick and suffocating. I stared at the irrefutable data laid out across my 6 panoramic monitors. This was not a case of simple corporate theft or greedy skimming. Jamal was not just an arrogant hedge fund manager who found a clever way to steal profits from his billionaire boss. How was a complete and absolute fraud. He was not generating a single dollar of actual profit in the legitimate stock market. He was paying the old investors with the money he actively stole from the new investors to maintain his lavish lifestyle and his powerful social standing in the city. I picked up the encrypted satellite phone Elias had provided to me. I dialed his direct secure line without hesitation. He answered on the very first ring. "Tell me exactly what you see, Clara," Elias demanded, his voice sharp and highly alert. I took a deep breath, organizing the catastrophic financial data into a precise verbal report. "It is worse than embezzlement, Elias," I said, my voice dead flat in the quiet room. "Jamal is not generating any real returns. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. And Nolan is the primary launderer, taking a 15% cut to route the stolen money through offshore real estate holdings in the Caribbean." The silence on the other end of the secure line was absolute and terrifying. When Elias finally spoke, his tone was chillingly calm and ruthless. "A Ponzi scheme." He repeated the words slowly. "Operating directly under the Thorn Capital umbrella. How long does he have until the entire fraudulent structure collapses completely and destroys the lives of everyone involved?" I pulled up the predictive liquidity projections on my center monitor. Based on the current cash burn rate, he has maybe 3 weeks before he defaults on the next major round of mandatory dividend payouts. I explained quickly. The incoming capital is slowing down significantly. He is desperate for fresh cash to keep the grand illusion alive. That is exactly why he was so eager to help Nolan liquidate my house equity while I was in a coma. They needed every available dollar they could steal to plug the rapidly growing holes in their sinking ship before the federal authorities noticed the massive missing funds. Elias exhaled heavily into the phone. "Can you identify the primary capital sources?" he asked, his voice cold and unforgiving. "Who is feeding the beast right now? Who are the anchor investors keeping this fraudulent operation afloat while he steals their entire life savings?" "I am running the final decryption on the master investor manifest right now," I replied, my fingers already flying across the keyboard to initiate the terminal sequence. "I will have the specific names for you in exactly 2 minutes." "Get me that list, Clara," Elias instructed. "We need to know exactly who is going down with his ship when we destroy it entirely." He disconnected the call abruptly, leaving me to my work. I turned my full attention back to the central monitor. The master investor list was protected by a final layer of military-grade encryption. Jamal had guarded this specific file with everything he possessed. This digital document was the beating heart of his entire criminal enterprise. It contained the names of every wealthy socialite, business executive, and country club elite who had foolishly handed their fortunes over to him. It was a roster of the elite naive enough to trust him with their money. I unleashed a brutal brute force attack program against the final firewall. The loading progress bar inched forward, agonizingly slow. I sat back and thought about the sheer arrogance required to pull off a financial scam of this massive magnitude. Jamal paraded around high society galas, wearing custom-tailored suits and heavy gold watches bought with blood money. Daphne sneered at working-class people while drinking expensive champagne funded entirely by stolen money. They looked down on me for working long, grueling hours to earn an honest living. They ridiculed my career choice while secretly living off the proceeds of a massive federal financial crime. They thought they were the untouchable elites of the city, holding immense power over everyone else who struggled to survive. The decryption progress bar hit 99%. I leaned closer to the glowing screen. My heart pounded a steady, relentless rhythm against my ribs. The digital firewall shattered into a million pieces. The encrypted file unlocked and decompressed rapidly. A massive, detailed spreadsheet populated on my right monitor. It listed hundreds of individual names along with their total capital contributions and their entirely fabricated return margins. The sheer scale of the theft was breathtaking and horrifying to witness. I sorted the spreadsheet by the highest total investment value to quickly identify the anchor investors holding the largest fake portfolios in the fund. The screen flickered as the data reorganized itself instantly. The rows shifted and aligned in descending order. I looked at the top two lines of the document, expecting to see unknown corporate executives or wealthy heirs who had inherited old generational wealth and sought quick, aggressive financial growth. I froze completely. My hands hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed by sudden, absolute shock. The breath left my lungs in a sudden, sharp rush. My blood ran completely cold, freezing the marrow deep in my bones. I stared at the two specific names sitting directly at the very top of the victim list, entirely unable to comprehend the cruel, devastating reality displayed on the glowing high-definition screen. The names glaring back at me in stark white font against the dark monitor were Richard and Brenda, my parents. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the corresponding data columns to ensure I was not misreading the digital ledger. But numbers do not lie, and forensic accounting leaves absolutely no room for interpretation. My parents had completely liquidated their entire personal life savings. Every single dollar they had meticulously accumulated over 40 years of corporate success and social climbing was gone. They had cashed out their retirement accounts, their diverse mutual funds, and even their conservative bond portfolios. But the financial suicide did not stop there. The records showed a massive recent influx of capital originating from a high-interest bridging loan. They had taken out a massive second mortgage on their multi-million-dollar estate in the wealthy northern suburbs. They handed every single cent over to their golden son-in-law, completely blinded by his arrogant promises of guaranteed 30% returns. Jamal was not investing their money. He was feeding it directly into the Ponzi scheme. He was using their generational wealth to pay off the older, angry investors and keep the fraudulent operation afloat just long enough for Nolan to siphon the remaining cash offshore. My parents were completely broke. They were utterly destitute, facing imminent foreclosure on their massive mansion and a retirement entirely devoid of capital. They just did not realize it yet. I sat back in the ergonomic leather chair, absorbing the sheer magnitude of their foolishness. They had thrown me and my newborn son out into the freezing rain to protect their relationship with a financial predator. They chose the illusion of elite wealth over their own flesh and blood. Now that very illusion was about to crush them into absolute poverty. As I stared at their names on the victim list, my personal laptop chimed with a loud incoming email notification. The sender was my sister Daphne. I opened the message. It was a digital invitation featuring ornate gold lettering and a photograph of my parents smiling pretentiously, holding expensive champagne flutes. The elegant header read, "You are cordially invited to the 40th wedding anniversary gala of Richard and Brenda." The event was scheduled for this coming Saturday at the most exclusive country club in Chicago. Below the formal invitation, Daphne had typed a highly personal mocking message. "Mom and Dad said if you come and publicly apologize for embarrassing us at the last party, Jamal might consider hiring you as a night shift receptionist at his hedge fund. We heard you are living in a filthy motel, so maybe you need the minimum wage." Oh, and Nolan and his gorgeous new fiancée Savannah are attending as our guests of honor. Savannah is wearing the $15,000 diamond ring Nolan bought with his latest bonus. Do not make a scene in your cheap thrift store clothes, Clara. Know your place. I read the venomous email twice. A normal person might have screamed or thrown the laptop across the room in a fit of uncontrollable rage. I did not throw my phone. I did not scream or cry. I simply smiled, a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. Daphne wanted me to know my place. She wanted me to crawl back to them begging for scraps while they paraded my cheating ex-husband around high society. I was about to show her exactly where I stood in the food chain. I clicked the reply button and typed a single word. Yes. I forwarded the RSVP confirmation to Daphne, ensuring she knew I was walking right into her trap. She probably thought I was desperate enough to actually beg for that receptionist job. Let her believe her own arrogant delusions. It would only make the impending demolition that much sweeter. I turned away from my personal laptop and picked up the heavily encrypted phone Elias Thorne had provided. I dialed a highly classified direct number I had memorized during my time working joint task force operations against the tri-state money laundering rings. "Special Agent Reynolds," I said, when the gruff voice answered on the other end of the secure line. "This is Clara." Clara Reynolds replied, his tone shifting immediately from bureaucratic boredom to sharp professional interest. The Bureau has missed your particular brand of financial destruction. Tell me you have something good for us. I have a complete 500-page encrypted dossier detailing a massive active Ponzi scheme involving interstate wire fraud, offshore money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, I stated, clearly projecting absolute authority into the receiver. I have the digital ledgers, the shell company, routing numbers, the fake employee manifests, and the exact coordinates of the perpetrators. The federal agent let out a low whistle over the line. We have been trying to nail Jamal for a year, but his books always looked immaculately clean. How did you bypass his internal firewalls, Clara? Because his billionaire boss handed me the master keys to the kingdom, I replied smoothly. Jamal is washing the money using a mid-level broker named Nolan. Nolan takes a 15% cut to route the stolen capital through non-existent commercial real estate holdings in the Caribbean. The entire hedge fund is a hollow shell burning through fresh capital to pay old dividends. The anchor investors funding this fraud are about to lose tens of millions of dollars. Reynolds typed furiously on his keyboard in the background. Send the encrypted dossier to my secure server right now, Clara. When do you want to drop the hammer on these guys? I leaned back in my chair looking at the digital anniversary invitation glowing on my screen. This Saturday night, I instructed coldly. Exactly at 9 o'clock. I want the federal asset freeze to trigger while they are standing in a room full of their wealthiest investors. I want them to lose everything in front of the entire world. I want the Securities and Exchange Commission to lock down every single account routing number and physical asset associated with Jamal and Nolan precisely when the clock strikes the hour. Consider it done, Clara Reynolds replied, his voice tight with predatory anticipation. The federal warrants will be fully processed and signed by a federal judge within 48 hours. We will have tactical units positioned 2 blocks away from the country club, right on schedule. When the clock strikes exactly 9, we execute the digital lock. Jamal and Nolan will not be able to move a single penny. I thanked him and disconnected the secure line. The trap was flawlessly set. I exported the massive 500-page dossier containing every shred of irrefutable digital evidence, compressing the files into a highly secure, heavily encrypted data packet. I transmitted the package directly to the federal servers, watching the progress bar fill the screen. It was the digital equivalent of loading a heavy artillery weapon. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension bleed out of my shoulders. For the past 3 weeks, I had existed on pure adrenaline and black coffee, tracking every fraudulent transaction Jamal had orchestrated. I mapped every offshore shell company Nolan used to wash the stolen capital. My own parents had eagerly handed over their entire life savings to a charismatic fraudster simply because Jamal drove a Ferrari and promised impossible financial returns. They betrayed their own daughter for the illusion of elite wealth. Tonight, that illusion would shatter into a million irreparable pieces. I walked out of the command center and down the quiet hallway toward the nursery. The elite security team monitored the perimeter, ensuring no unwanted visitors could ever breach the penthouse. Inside the softly lit room, Beatrice the nanny rocked Leo gently in her arms. My son was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the massive storm his mother was about to unleash upon the city. I stroked his warm cheek, feeling a surge of fierce protective energy. Nolan had called this beautiful boy a burden. My parents had refused to shelter him from the freezing cold. Daphne had mocked his mother while sipping expensive champagne. They all thought they had discarded us effortlessly, but they had only ignited a fire they could not possibly extinguish. I returned to the war room, my resolve hardened into absolute steel. I spent the next several hours coordinating the logistical details with Agent Reynolds, ensuring the tactical units understood the layout of the country club. The Securities and Exchange Commission required specific transactional timestamps to authorize the immediate asset seizure, and I provided every single data point flawlessly. Jamal had built his house of cards on the backs of greedy investors like my parents, but he had severely underestimated the destructive capability of a forensic accountant who had nothing left to lose. A soft knock on the reinforced door pulled me from my intense focus. Elias Thorne walked into the command center. The billionaire chief executive looked at the cascading data streams on my 6 monitors with a nod of profound respect. You have executed a masterpiece, Clara, he said, his voice resonating with deep authority in the quiet room. You dissected a massive financial conspiracy that baffled my best internal risk management auditors. But tonight is not just about federal justice. It is about personal reclamation. Elias signaled to his executive assistant, who walked into the room carrying a heavy garment bag and a locked velvet case. They broke you down to build their fake empires, Elias said, gesturing to the items the assistant placed carefully on the glass desk. You cannot walk into that country club looking like the victim they expect. Tonight you do not just attend a party. You execute a high society demolition. I stood up and unzipped the heavy black garment bag. Inside hung a breathtaking custom-tailored crimson evening gown. It was a masterpiece of haute couture designed to command absolute attention and project fierce, unrelenting power. I unclasped the velvet case, revealing a heavy diamond necklace that caught the ambient light of the monitors and fractured it into a million brilliant sparks. These are from the Thorn Capital corporate vault. Elias explained, his gray eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Wear them as armor. Let them see exactly what true power looks like before you rip their fraudulent world to shreds. I looked at the diamonds, and then back to the monitors, displaying the impending ruin of the people who had abandoned me in the freezing rain. The game board was perfectly set. The federal agents were mobilizing, and the financial guillotine was hoisted high into the air. Saturday night would bring a reckoning they would never forget. Saturday night would bring a reckoning they would never forget. I spent Friday morning locking down the final operational protocols with Special Agent Reynolds over the encrypted satellite link. We needed absolute precision. The Securities and Exchange Commission operates on strict federal guidelines, and coordinating an immediate asset seizure across multiple offshore accounts required flawless synchronization. Reynolds assured me that the tactical units were fully briefed and ready to mobilize. I transmitted the final batch of routing numbers extracted from Jamal's hidden ledgers. I need the digital perimeter sealed exactly at 9:00 p.m. I instructed, my eyes scanning the live data feeds on my 6 monitors. Jamal is arrogant, but he is not stupid. The moment his primary master accounts freeze, his automated systems will alert him. He will try to execute a burn protocol and dump the remaining liquid cash into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. We have a maximum window of 30 seconds to shut down his entire financial infrastructure before he realizes he is trapped. Reynolds chuckled, a low, gritty sound over the secure connection. Do not worry, Clara. I have the cyber division standing by to sever his connection to the Cayman Islands servers at 8:59 and 59 seconds. The federal judge signed the warrants an hour ago. We are bringing him down for wire fraud, embezzlement, and severe violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Nolan is getting wrapped up in the exact same indictment. I disconnected the line as the heavy soundproof door to my command center swung open. Elias Thorne stepped into the room. The billionaire chief executive commanded the space effortlessly, his sharp gray eyes taking in the cascading code on my monitors. Behind him, his executive assistant wheeled in a heavy black velvet garment bag and a locked titanium security case. You look like a woman preparing for war, Clara, Elias observed, crossing the room to stand beside my desk. I am not preparing for war, Mr. Thorne, I replied, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. The war is already over. Tonight is simply the execution phase. I have mapped every single dollar they stole. I have identified every fake corporation and phantom employee. They are completely surrounded, and they do not even know the walls are closing in. Elias smiled, his expression shifting into something cold and predatory. He gestured to his assistant, who carefully unzipped the heavy garment bag. They broke you down to build their fake empires, Clara. They used your medical emergency to steal your home, and they laughed while doing it. Tonight you do not just attend an anniversary party. You execute a high society demolition. I stood up as the assistant revealed the dress. It was a breathtaking custom-tailored crimson evening gown. The silk fabric caught the ambient light from my computer screens, glowing like liquid fire. It was designed to command absolute authority in any room. Elias opened the titanium security case, revealing a heavy diamond necklace and matching earrings. These pieces are from the Thorn Capital corporate vault, he explained. Wear them as armor. Let them see exactly what true power looks like before you rip their fraudulent world to shreds. I reached out and touched the cold, flawless diamonds. My parents, Richard and Brenda, had sold their souls and their daughter to protect their elite country club status. They were about to learn that true elite status does not come from a Ponzi scheme. It comes from untouchable leverage and absolute control. I thanked Elias and returned to my digital preparations, ensuring every single failsafe was firmly in place. I programmed a specialized script to run on a continuous loop masking the FBI server infiltration from Jamal's internal monitoring software. He would see normal market fluctuations right up until the exact second his net worth plummeted to absolute zero. The anticipation thrummed in my veins, a steady beat of impending justice. Saturday evening arrived with a chilling wind sweeping off Lake Michigan. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, looking out over the glittering city skyline. I wore the crimson gown, and it fit like a second skin. The heavy diamond necklace resting against my collarbone felt like a physical manifestation of my new reality. I was not the terrified, penniless woman crying in the freezing rain 3 weeks ago. I was a weapon forged in the fires of their profound betrayal. I walked into the nursery and kissed my sleeping son Leo on his warm forehead. The elite security team and the private nanny. Beatrice assured me he was perfectly safe. I turned and walked out the door, stepping into the private elevator. The black Maybach limousine was waiting for me at the curb. The driver held the door open and I slid into the luxurious leather interior. The drive to the exclusive country club in the wealthy northern suburbs took 40 minutes. My pulse remained remarkably steady. As the tires hummed over the wet asphalt, I reflected on the sheer arrogance required to steal from a forensic accountant. Nolan lived with me for 5 years. I watched me dissect complex corporate tax evasions and trace hidden assets across international borders. He knew exactly what I was capable of accomplishing when provoked. Yet his greed blinded his basic logic. He assumed my maternal instincts, and the trauma of a medically induced coma would render me permanently helpless. He thought leaving me penniless in the rain would break my spirit. He was completely wrong. He did not break my spirit. He merely removed my remaining moral restraints. Jamal was equally foolish. He relied on his aggressive personality and his expensive suits to intimidate the federal regulators. He assumed the regulatory agencies were too slow and too underfunded to crack his sophisticated offshore algorithms. He never anticipated that his billionaire boss would hire an independent ghost to audit the shadowy corners of his hedge fund. Tonight, they would both learn the devastating cost of their towering hubris. I watched the passing streetlights blur against the tinted windows of the Maybach. The city felt electric, alive with the promise of impending justice. I could feel the cold metal of the diamond necklace pressing against my skin, grounding me in the present moment. The diamonds were heavy, a constant reminder of the immense power Elias Thorne had entrusted to me. I mentally reviewed the federal timeline. 8:45 p.m. The tactical teams move into position around the perimeter of the venue, blocking all possible exits. 8:55 p.m. The cyber division infiltrates the offshore networks and neutralizes the banking alarms. 9 o'clock exactly, the trap snaps shut, sealing the financial doom of every single participant in the scheme. My role was to serve as the ultimate distraction, keeping Jamal's attention entirely focused on me, while the federal government quietly dismantled his entire life behind the scenes. I thought about Daphne and her malicious email. She wanted me to show up in thrift store clothes and beg for a job as a receptionist. She wanted to humiliate me in front of Nolan and his new young fiancée, Savannah. I imagined the look on Savannah's face when she realized the massive diamond engagement ring she was proudly flaunting was purchased with stolen money and would soon be seized as evidence in a federal criminal investigation. They had built an entire reality based on lies, theft, and absolute cruelty. I was bringing the absolute truth directly to their front door. The consequences of their arrogant actions were finally catching up to them at terminal velocity. Inside that opulent ballroom, my family was celebrating their own fake prosperity, completely oblivious to the massive storm I had meticulously engineered to destroy them. The limousine pulled up to the grand entrance of the country club. The venue was obscenely lavish, featuring massive stone pillars and valet attendants rushing to park luxury vehicles. Society photographers flashed their cameras near the red carpet, capturing the arrival of Chicago's financial elite. This was the absolute pinnacle of my parents' social climbing achievements. They had spent 40 years sacrificing every shred of basic human decency to finally secure their position among these wealthy socialites. When my driver opened the door and I stepped out onto the pavement, the atmosphere instantly shifted. The photographers scrambled to capture my image, whispering furiously to one another about the stunning unknown woman draped in millions of dollars of corporate diamonds. I kept my posture perfectly straight, projecting absolute unbothered confidence as the camera flashes illuminated the cold night air. I did not look away or flinch. I moved with the grace of a woman who held the fate of everyone inside in the palm of her hand. I handed my coat to the valet attendant, who stared at my crimson gown with wide, intimidated eyes. I walked up the wide marble steps of the country club, leaving the freezing weather outside. The heavy, ornate double doors loomed in front of me, guarded by two sharply dressed security personnel holding guest manifests. They stepped aside instantly, intimidated by my commanding presence and the sheer value of the jewels resting against my skin. I took a deep, steadying breath and pushed the doors open, walking directly into the dangerous lion's den tonight. I pushed the heavy, ornate double doors open and stepped directly into the grand ballroom of the country club. The sheer opulence of the venue hit me immediately. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden glow over dozens of tables draped in imported white silk. Waiters in crisp black and white uniforms carried silver trays loaded with premium champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. It was a perfect physical manifestation of the stolen wealth my family was currently parading around as their own. I stood at the top of the grand staircase overlooking the massive room. For a few seconds, I was just another guest arriving late. Then the spotlight hit the heavy diamond necklace resting against my collarbone. The gems fractured the ambient light, sending brilliant flashes across the walls. A woman standing near the entrance gasped audibly. I kept my posture perfectly straight, projecting the cold, absolute authority Elias Thorne had instilled in me. I began my descent down the marble staircase. The crimson haute couture evening gown flowed behind me like a river of blood. The reaction rippled through the ballroom with terrifying speed. A group of wealthy regional banking executives closest to the stairs stopped their conversation completely. They turned to stare, their eyes wide with intimidated curiosity. The sudden silence spread outward like a shockwave. The live jazz band playing softly in the corner faltered. The saxophone player missed a note, and the drummer slowed his rhythm until the music simply died away into an awkward, heavy silence. The entire room of Chicago's financial elite was now staring directly at me. I scanned the sea of expensive suits and designer dresses, locating my targets effortlessly. Daphne was the first one to realize exactly who had just commanded the attention of the entire gala. She was standing near the towering ice sculpture, holding a crystal champagne flute and laughing at something a wealthy investor had just said. Her eyes locked onto mine. The smug, arrogant smile vanished from her face, instantly replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. Her fingers went completely slack. The crystal flute slipped from her hand and shattered violently against the polished hardwood floor. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed loudly in the quiet room. The noise drew the immediate attention of my parents. Richard and Brenda turned around, aggressively annoyed by the sudden disruption to their perfect 40th anniversary celebration. When Brenda saw me walking toward the center of the room, all the color completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost returning from the grave to drag her straight down to hell. Richard gripped the edge of a nearby table, his knuckles turning white as he stared in absolute disbelief at the daughter he had abandoned in the freezing rain. A few feet away, Nolan was busy boasting to a circle of older, vulnerable investors, trying to secure more capital for Jamal's offshore Ponzi scheme. Savannah hung tightly onto his arm, wearing a tight silver dress that screamed of new money. Nolan turned his head, following the gaze of the stunned investors. When his eyes met mine, he actually stumbled backward, his jaw dropped open. I expected to see a broken, penniless woman wearing stained hospital sweatpants and begging for a chance to see her newborn son. Instead, he was looking at a woman radiating more wealth and raw power than anyone else in the entire country club. I did not stop walking. I moved with deliberate, measured steps straight into the heart of the lion's den. The crowd naturally parted for me, stepping aside as if I were royalty. I stopped directly in front of my family. They converged on me instantly, forming a tight, aggressive circle in a desperate attempt to shield my presence from their wealthy friends. Savannah was the first to attack, her shrill voice breaking the tense silence. "What are you doing here, Clara?" She sneered, looking me up and down with obvious jealousy. She desperately tried to project confidence, but her hands were shaking. "Did you rent that dress with your government food stamps? You must have dug through a dozen thrift store bins to find something that fits." I looked at Savannah with a cold, pitying smile. I let my eyes drop deliberately to her left hand, where she was proudly displaying the massive diamond engagement ring Nolan had given her. "That is a very beautiful diamond, Savannah," I said, my voice carrying clearly. "A brilliant cut 3-carat stone set in platinum. It retails for exactly $15,000. I know that because Nolan purchased it using the stolen equity from my suburban home. You are wearing my blood money on your finger. I hope you enjoy it while it lasts, because federal evidence tends to be confiscated very quickly." Savannah gasped, pulling her hand back defensively and hiding it behind Nolan's arm. Nolan stepped forward, his face flushed with panicked rage. "You have completely lost your mind, Clara," he hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid alerting the nearby guests. "You have absolutely no proof of anything. Get out of here right now before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and harassment. You do not belong in a room like this anymore." Before I could dissect Nolan's pathetic threat, Jamal pushed his way to the front of the group. My arrogant brother-in-law towered over me, adjusting the cuffs of his custom white tuxedo jacket. He glared down at me with absolute contempt, his dark eyes burning with hostility. "Security should have kept the trash out of this venue." Jamal growled, his voice dripping with venom. "I told you 3 weeks ago to take a bus to a shelter. What is this pathetic display? You came crawling back here for a handout, Clara. Let me make this incredibly clear to you. You are not getting a single dime from my hedge fund. My business is untouchable. I control millions of dollars and you are absolutely nothing." My mother. Brenda grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "Clara, you are ruining our entire anniversary gala," she whispered harshly, her voice trembling with intense fury. "We told you to stay away. You are a failed wife and a complete disgrace to this family. If you do not turn around and walk out those doors this instant, I will personally have the security guards drag you out by your hair. You are embarrassing us in front of the most powerful people in the city." I did not pull my arm away from her grip. I simply looked down at her hand until she felt the freezing intensity of my gaze and slowly let go. I raised my left wrist and deliberately checked my heavy diamond watch. The flawless stones glittered brightly under the chandeliers. It was exactly 8:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the federal asset freeze triggered across every single account Jamal and Nolan possessed. 2 minutes until my parents realized they had traded their daughter for absolute financial ruin. "I am not here for a handout, Jamal," I replied smoothly, my voice perfectly level and terrifyingly calm. "And I am certainly not here to embarrass you, Mother. You have all done a spectacular job of embarrassing yourselves. You just do not realize it yet." Richard stepped forward, attempting to use his paternal authority to intimidate me into submission. "That is enough of your dramatic nonsense, Clara," he ordered, pointing a stiff finger toward the exit. "Leave this country club immediately. We are done entertaining your delusions." Jamal signaled the guards to remove her. Jamal raised his hand, preparing to snap his fingers at the 2 large security guards standing near the ballroom entrance. He never got the chance. I turned my back on my furious family, completely dismissing their empty threats and their false authority. I walked with absolute purpose directly toward the main stage at the front of the ballroom. "Clara, what are you doing?" Daphne shrieked, her voice echoing sharply. "Stop her, Jamal. She is going to ruin everything." Jamal lunged forwards to grab my shoulder, but I sidestepped him with practiced ease. I climbed the 3 short carpeted stairs onto the main stage. The jazz band leader stared at me in wide-eyed shock as I approached him. I reached out and firmly took the microphone directly from his trembling hands. The high-pitched feedback whined for a split second, silencing the last remaining whispers in the massive ballroom. Every single eye in the country club was now locked entirely on me. I looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, powerful executives, and socialites. In the center of the room, my family stood frozen in absolute terror. Jamal looked like a man who suddenly realized he was standing on a live landmine. Nolan was physically shaking, his cowardly nature completely exposed. My parents clutched each other, their faces pale with impending dread. I tapped the side of the microphone, ensuring it was broadcasting at maximum volume. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice booming over the massive speaker system and vibrating through the floorboards. "Please forgive the unexpected interruption to this beautiful celebration. I am Clara, and I have a special anniversary toast for my parents, Richard and Brenda. And I also brought an early wedding present for my deceitful ex-husband Nolan and his brilliant partner Jamal." I checked my watch one last time. It was exactly 8:59 p.m. and 50 seconds. The countdown was in its final terminal stage. I looked directly into Jamal's terrified eyes and smiled. The demolition was fully loaded and the detonator was firmly in my hand. I adjusted my grip on the heavy microphone, feeling the cool, smooth metal against my palm. The entire ballroom was completely silent, projecting the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that usually precedes a massive physical explosion. Every single eye in the wealthy crowd was fixed entirely on me. I looked out over the vast sea of expensive designer dresses and custom-tailored suits, locating the pale, terrified faces of the very people who had proudly and cruelly orchestrated my absolute ruin just 3 short weeks ago today. Jamal stood completely frozen, his usual arrogant swagger entirely evaporated into the thin, cold air. Nolan was physically trembling, his deep cowardice fully exposed under the bright, glittering crystal chandeliers above us. Richard and Brenda clutched each other, looking completely bewildered by my sudden hostile takeover of their precious anniversary gala. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 40 years of marriage between my parents." I projected my voice, allowing it to resonate clearly and powerfully across the massive, silent room. 40 years is a truly remarkable milestone for any couple to achieve together here today. It takes immense dedication, deep trust, and above all, an unwavering commitment to protecting one's own interests at absolutely any cost. My parents have certainly mastered that dark, manipulative art over the decades. Richard stepped forward, his face a tight mask of furious indignation. "Turn off that microphone, Clara," he demanded, his voice shaking with suppressed rage and fear. "You are making a complete fool of yourself and ruining our spotless reputation in this community." I just ignored his pathetic command, keeping my eyes locked squarely on the wealthy elite investors gathered cautiously around the massive, elegant room here today. Many of you standing in this elegant room have eagerly entrusted your personal family fortunes to my highly arrogant brother-in-law Jamal. I continued, my tone remaining perfectly calm and authoritative. "You view him as a brilliant financial prodigy who can do no wrong. You attend his lavish parties, you admire his expensive cars, and you eagerly await those guaranteed 30% returns he promises you every single quarter. My own parents actually took out a massive second mortgage on their estate and foolishly liquidated their entire life savings just to join his highly exclusive investment portfolio right today." A low murmur of deep confusion rippled through the gathered crowd of elite socialites. Jamal shoved his way past a terrified waiter, his pristine white tuxedo jacket looking suddenly restrictive. "Shut your mouth, Clara." Jamal barked, his arrogant facade slipping rapidly to reveal genuine raw panic underneath. "You do not know anything about my business operations. You are just a bitter, unemployed ex-wife trying to cause a desperate scene because Nolan finally left you for someone much better." "I know absolutely everything about your business, Jamal," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly serious low register here today. It cut through his foolish insults like a sharpened knife. "I am a forensic accountant, and for the past 3 weeks, I have had supreme administrative access to every single ledger, routing number, and offshore shell company you currently operate under the radar." The color drained from Jamal's face, instantly leaving him looking sickly and pale. He stopped walking, his custom Italian leather shoes frozen on the polished hardwood floor. My brilliant brother-in-law Jamal is not a financial genius, I announced, clearly articulating every syllable for the entire ballroom to hear and fully understand right here now tonight. He is an absolute complete fraud. He is running a massive Ponzi scheme. He is generating zero actual market returns for anyone. He is simply taking the fresh capital from new investors and using it to pay off the older investors, creating a hollow, fragile illusion of immense profitability. And my ex-husband Nolan is his primary money mule. Nolan backed away from Savannah, his eyes darting frantically toward the main exit doors. The older, wealthy investors standing near him suddenly shifted their stances, their expressions turning openly hostile and suspicious as they all looked directly at him right now. Nolan takes a 15% cut of the stolen capital. I continued, my voice echoing loudly off the vaulted ceilings. He uses his broker clearance to wash the money through non-existent commercial real estate holdings in the Caribbean. 3 weeks ago, Nolan forged a power of attorney while I was in a medically induced coma. He sold my home for cash and emptied my newborn son's college fund. He handed that stolen money directly to Jamal, who needed emergency liquidity to prevent this entire fraudulent house of cards from collapsing prematurely before he could effectively run far away today. They threw me out into the freezing rain to protect their criminal enterprise and secure their own wealth. Lies. Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, desperate denial. She is a pathological liar. Jamal is making us millions of dollars. Let us look at the visual evidence then, Mother, I said smoothly without missing a single beat. I raised my secure mobile phone, holding it high up for the entire room to clearly see. I deliberately tapped the final execute command on my glowing screen, initiating the sequence. Behind the main stage, two massive high-definition screens hung heavily now. These projector screens had been displaying a slideshow of my parents' 40 years of marriage. Happy vacation photos and forced family portraits flashed in a continuous looping video. The exact moment my finger hit the screen, those cheerful images vanished entirely without a trace. The large screens flickered to pitch black for a fraction of a second before a live data feed took over completely. A collective sharp gasp echoed through the crowded ballroom as people stared. Displayed in towering bright white numbers against a dark blue background were the master ledger accounts for Jamal's hedge fund operations here today. Look at the screens, ladies and gentlemen, I instructed, gesturing grandly to the massive digital displays behind me. You are looking at a live direct feed into the primary offshore holding accounts managed by Jamal's firm. The current total balance sits at exactly $80 million. That represents the collective life savings of almost everyone standing in this room, including my parents. Jamal reached furiously into his tuxedo pocket, pulling out his smartphone. His thumbs flew across the screen as he desperately tried to log into his administrative portals to stop the massive terminal financial bleeding right here, right now. Turn those screens off right now, Jamal yelled at the country club staff, his voice cracking. This is a massive breach of confidential financial data. Your security protocols were permanently bypassed days ago, Jamal. I stated calmly, looking down at him from the elevated stage. The federal authorities have been closely monitoring every single transaction you authorized. I looked down at my heavy diamond watch. The second hand ticked forward with relentless mechanical precision. It was 8:59 and 50 seconds p.m. The final demolition was mere seconds away from utterly destroying their entire world right here now today. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not take kindly to interstate wire fraud, I announced, my voice cutting through the rising panic swelling rapidly in the ballroom. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation is particularly aggressive when pursuing severe violations of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. What are you talking about, Clara? Richard demanded, his voice trembling violently as he stared up at the massive glowing screens. What is going to happen to our money? Watch the screens, Dad, I replied, my tone completely devoid of any remaining familial warmth or lingering filial sympathy for any of them. Watch exactly what happens when you trade your own daughter for a charismatic criminal. 55 seconds, 56 seconds, 57 seconds. Nolan grabbed Savannah's arm, trying to pull her toward the side service doors to escape, but a tight group of angry investors physically blocked his path. Savannah screamed loudly, trying to wrench her hand out of his tight grip. 58 seconds. 59 seconds. Happy anniversary, I said softly into the microphone. The clock struck exactly 9:00 p.m. The federal freeze triggered instantly, locking down the entire global financial system completely and forever today. Across the globe, specialized cyber units severed Jamal's connection to the offshore servers, executing the synchronized digital lockdown perfectly. On the massive projector screens behind me, the $80 million balance flickered wildly. The digital numbers began to rapidly plummet, rolling backward at blinding, terrifying speed. 70 million, 40 million, 10 million. The entire ballroom erupted into absolute chaotic madness as the wealthy elite watched their vast fortunes vanish in real time. People shouted aggressively, shoving each other. Then the screens permanently locked, settling on $0. Suddenly, the heavy, ornate double doors of the grand ballroom burst open forcefully. Suddenly, the heavy, ornate double doors of the grand ballroom burst open forcefully. The heavy oak panels slammed against the wall with a deafening crash that echoed over the panicked shouting of the wealthy investors. 24 federal agents wearing dark tactical gear and windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned across the back flooded into the luxurious space. They moved with absolute military precision, instantly securing every single exit and cutting off any possible avenue of escape. The terrified socialites scrambled out of their way, dropping their expensive crystal champagne flutes and designer handbags in pure panic. Nolan tried to sprint toward the catering kitchen, but 2 federal agents intercepted him immediately. They slammed him hard against a white linen draped table, sending silver platters of caviar crashing to the polished hardwood floor. Jamal stood completely frozen near the main stage. His arrogant facade was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic, trembling reality of a coward who finally realized he was trapped. He held his phone in his hands, still desperately tapping the screen, hoping the zero balance was just a glitch. Behind the wall of federal agents, a towering figure walked calmly into the center of the chaotic ballroom. Elias Thorne, the billionaire chief executive of Thorne Capital, moved with the quiet, lethal authority of an apex predator closing in on its trapped prey. He wore a flawless, bespoke navy suit, and his sharp gray eyes locked directly onto Jamal. The remaining investors in the room recognized the legendary billionaire instantly. A hushed, terrified whisper rippled through the crowd as they stepped back to give him a wide berth. Elias stopped right in front of the stage, looking up at me with a nod of profound respect. Then he turned his attention to the 2 men who had foolishly tried to steal from his empire. Special Agent Reynolds walked up beside him, holding a thick stack of federal arrest warrants. "Arrest them both," Elias announced, his voice resonating with deep, uncompromising power across the quieted room. "Arrest them for wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and severe violations of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You boys made a catastrophic mistake when you decided to use my corporate infrastructure to run your pathetic little Ponzi scheme." The federal agents moved in simultaneously. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Jamal's wrists echoed loudly. Jamal let out a high-pitched, panicked scream. "You cannot do this to me," he sobbed uncontrollably, his custom white tuxedo jacket tearing as the agents forced his arms behind his back. "I am a respected hedge fund manager, and I demand to call my lawyers right now." "You do not have any lawyers, Jamal," I replied, speaking clearly into the microphone so the entire ballroom could hear his absolute humiliation. "You cannot afford legal representation when your bank accounts possess a balance of $0. The federal government just seized everything you own." Across the room, Nolan was violently thrashing against the agents holding him down. He looked up at Savannah, desperately seeking some form of comfort or support from the young woman he had destroyed my life to be with. Savannah, however, was not looking at him with love. She was staring at the federal agents with wide-eyed, absolute terror. She looked down at her left hand, where the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring sparkled under the crystal chandeliers. She realized instantly that wearing stolen federal evidence was a direct ticket to a prison cell. Savannah let out a piercing theatrical shriek. She aggressively yanked the heavy platinum ring off her finger. "You lied to me, you pathetic broke loser!" she screamed at Nolan, hurling the expensive diamond directly at his face. The ring bounced off his forehead and rolled away into the crowd. Savannah turned around and ran frantically out the open front doors, leaving him handcuffed and weeping on the floor. Daphne watched her husband Jamal being dragged away in chains. Her perfect emerald green cocktail dress was stained with spilled wine. The luxurious illusion she had built her entire identity around was crumbling into dust before her eyes. "My perfect life is completely ruined," Daphne wailed, collapsing dramatically onto the marble floor. She beat her fists against the ground, sobbing loudly. "What am I supposed to do now since I have absolutely nothing left?" "You can always apply for that night shift receptionist job, Daphne," I reminded her coldly, quoting the exact mocking email she had sent me just days ago. Though I highly doubt the federal penitentiary is currently hiring right now. My parents, Richard and Brenda, finally realized the true terminal magnitude of their financial devastation. The 30% returns Jamal had promised them were fake. Their massive estate in the wealthy northern suburbs was heavily mortgaged to fund a criminal enterprise. Their entire generational wealth was gone, permanently vaporized into the digital ether. They were completely broke and facing imminent homelessness. They looked up at me standing on the stage, draped in millions of dollars of corporate diamonds, holding the absolute power of a billionaire executive backing me up. The reality of their catastrophic mistake finally broke through their lifelong arrogant delusions. They pushed their way past the shocked investors and literally crawled on their hands and knees toward the edge of the stage. "Clara, please." Brenda wept bitterly, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "You work for Mr. Thorne. You are his chief forensic accountant. Please, you have to tell him to give us our money back. We lost everything, Clara. The bank is going to take our home tomorrow morning." Richard reached up with trembling hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of my crimson designer gown. "We are your parents, Clara," he begged, his voice cracking with raw, pathetic desperation. "We are your own flesh and blood. You cannot just leave us here with absolutely nothing. We made a mistake, but you have to forgive us and fix this right now." I looked down at the two people who had brought me into this world. The same people who had allowed me to stand shivering in the freezing sleet with my newborn son just 3 weeks ago. They had actively blamed me for my husband's infidelity. They had proudly chosen a flashy, charismatic fraudster over their own loyal daughter. They did not love me. They only loved the wealth and status I currently represented. I felt absolutely no pity for them. I felt no lingering familial obligation. My veins ran with pure absolute ice. I stared down at their weeping, pathetic faces and felt nothing but cold, satisfying closure. I slowly opened my designer clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was the exact same crumpled $50 bill that Jamal had arrogantly thrown into the dirt at my feet on the night they abandoned me. I had saved it specifically for this exact moment. I held the crumpled green bill out over the edge of the stage. I let it slip between my fingers. It fluttered slowly through the air, landing softly on the polished hardwood floor right in front of my weeping parents. "Take a bus to a shelter," I said, my voice projecting absolute finality through the microphone. "Buy some cheap food. Just do not bleed on my designer shoes." I turned my back on them forever. I handed the microphone back to the stunned bandleader and walked down the side stairs of the stage. The elite socialites and banking executives immediately parted, forming a wide, clear path for me to exit the ballroom. I walked with my head held high, my posture radiating absolute, untouchable victory. I did not look back at the chaotic scene behind me. I did not need to see Jamal and Nolan being loaded into federal transport vehicles. I did not need to watch my parents weeping over a $50 bill. Justice had been fully served according to the exact parameters I designed. I walked out the heavy front doors of the country club, stepping into the crisp, cool night air. The black Maybach limousine was idling perfectly at the curb, waiting just for me. The driver rushed forward, opening the heavy armored door with a respectful bow. I slid into the luxurious leather interior, letting the quiet warmth of the vehicle surround me. Take me home, I instructed the driver. I need to get right back to my son. As the limousine pulled away from the country club, I looked out the tinted window at the glowing city skyline. I had hit rock bottom 3 weeks ago, completely stripped of my home, my savings, and my family. But that rock bottom had proven to be the ultimate solid foundation. I reclaimed my power and secured an incredible future for Leo. Thank you for listening to my story today. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye, everyone.